Alrighty, my friends. Hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time of day you are choosing to watch these videos. So welcome to our almost second to last installment for oceanography. What we're going to do now is focus in on marine mammals. So in our previous material, we looked at bony fish and deep sea fish and other different types of nekton. So remember, nekton means anything that can swim horizontally on their own. It does not include plankton, right? Because they can only go vertical. But if we're considering our lovely little nekton, now we're going to go into marine mammals. Before we really dive into that, though, of course, just have our main announcements. Get going on late work if you are behind on it. My late work deadline is extraordinarily quickly approaching, so make sure that you are tapping away at any assignments that I'm allowing you to turn things in late. And also, of course, per the usual, those smart book reading assignments, right? So chapters 7 through 14 are required for you to complete. Chapter 15 is extra credit. So if you didn't get to any of the previous smart book reading assignments and you want to go ahead and tap in for getting at least a little bit of credit back for that, then you can do chapter 15. So get going on those if needed, or if you have the time and bandwidth to do so. Other than that, those are kind of all my main big announcements. Please reach out if you have any questions, comments, and or concerns on anything before the end of the semester arises. And Nubs right here being your cheerleader too, right? So we'll make it through, and she will she'll make us through, get us through. Also, this is from a dog, so that's fun. He's fine. He just was giving me a hug and a claw just kind of got the side of my face, so don't mind the Joker impersonation. Okay, so diving into the material for this week. So marine mammals. So I want you to take a moment, maybe pause the video and think about what makes a mammal a mammal. What characteristics do mammals have that other animals do not? Or other different phylum do not, or classes. Think about yourself. You're a human, right? And humans are mammals. So what are attributes that we have that perhaps other animals do not? So hopefully you had a moment to think to yourself what makes a mammal a mammal. And if you didn't, here we go. So mammals are warm-blooded, right? So our body temperature is regulated on its own. We don't have to be a lizard and sit out in the sun to warm up. And humans are at about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Fun fact, so are polar bears, which is kind of wild to think about. We breathe air. We have hair or fur. We bear live young, and marine mammals also have mammary glands or produce milk. So that's how we make sure our babies stay alive. And what I'm going to do now is go through some of the various marine mammals that are out there. Obviously, just like the fish, I can't cover every single one. But what I want to do is cover some of the main ones that your book covers and ones that we tend to talk about at length. Starting with pinnipeds. So pinnipeds are basically any sort of seal, or sea lion, walrus, that kind of thing. So that whole, I don't want to say genre because genre is not the right word, but that whole kind of subspecies. And so your book has a couple of little sketches here. So the harbor seal is this little cutie right here. They are extraordinarily curious and they coexist very, very well with humans. Sea otters, which I'll cover actually in the next slide, are much like river otters, but they live in salt water. So if you ever wondered to yourself, oh, river otters, sea otters, what's the difference? Literally just where they live. Elephant seals are these little buddies as well. These are actually well known to mate on the California coastlines perhaps you've tried to go to a beach before and maybe it's been closed off because local authorities will kind of close off those beaches to allow for the pups to be raised without human interference, because as I'm sure you are all well aware, humans are great when it comes to interacting with wildlife. Not great at all, actually. And some other ones that you may have seen around include the California sea lion. These little buddies, they bark, they're very loud. If you've been to Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco, there's hundreds of them there right now as of May 5th, 2024. So that's definitely like a tourist attraction, or one of the tourist attractions of San Francisco. Kind of cool. What all of these creatures display are very similar mating habits. They can migrate very long distances, and generally the males will arrive first in order to establish dominance. I'll touch a bit further on walrus here in a second as well. So diving in on some specifics on these little cuties, our little sea otters, we are very well aware that they are a keystone species to kelp forests. So definitely review that idea if you have forgotten about that. Really just think about, what they eat and why that's important to kelp forest maintenance. So sea otters, by the way, are part of like the kind of class of Fissipedia, if I'm saying that correctly, which includes animals like cats, dogs, raccoons, and bears. So it is almost pretty true to say they are like little sea puppies. And sea otters are actually the smallest of all marine mammals. And they actually don't have any blubber, but they have extraordinarily thick fur, some of the thickest fur of our marine mammals. And they keep it very clean. They have to, they're constantly kind of, grooming themselves to make sure that everything is clean. They also consume about 20% of their body weight on the daily, which is kind of wild, right? If you think about like how much food you eat maybe, and like, your body weight, and this is kind of wild to think about. And they used to be hunted for their fur in the fur trade when that was really big, but thankfully their numbers have recovered. And currently, as the recording of this video, there's about 100,000 individuals documented. So that's good. Really, really good. Again, because they are a keystone species to kelp forests. So we need them. We need them to help make sure that lives, thrives, and survives. Next up, we have the walrus. Walrus are very fascinating creatures. They don't have any external ears, which is kind of interesting. Both males and females actually have tusks. I don't know, when I was a kid, I always thought that it was just the males that had tusks, but that's indeed not the case. Unfortunately, their current population is unknown, again, at the time of this recording, and climate change is very, very likely harming their populations. I have this link of this behind the scenes from the show Our Planet, which is another David Attenborough BBC show. It's linked in the assignment for this week, so you can watch it on your own if you want. I will preface that it is very sad, kind of makes me cry every time actually, but the basic idea of it is that walrus need sea ice to rest on when they're hunting. So walrus are creatures that actually hunt on the ocean floor. So they use their tusks to kind of claw out things like clams and anything that's kind of in the benthic environment, in the bottom of the sea, basically. And they use the ice to rest after they've kind of held their breath for a long time, go underwater, all this kind of stuff. And so what they're finding is that since there's way less sea ice, they're having to go onto land in order to rest, but there's not as much land available in their hunting grounds for the whole population. So what is happening, what they're observing, is that some walrus are actually climbing up onto the cliffs in order to have some place to rest. But it's too packed, and so they end up just falling down the cliff to their deaths, which is really quite sad. Not to be a Debbie Downer or anything, but it's just a very visual effect of climate change, something that we can see. speaking of animals being impacted by climate change, we have our polar bears. So polar bears, really interesting. Their fur is actually see-through. It's not white. We see it as white, but it's because it's hollow, and that actually helps with insulation. And they actually have more problems being too hot than being too cold. So their internal body temperature is like ours, like humans, where it's 98.6 degrees, and they live in the Arctic. So Arctic literally translates to bear. So they are found in the North Pole, and that's also why the Antarctica means not bear. So no polar bears live in the South Pole. So all up hanging out in the North Pole. They are the top carnivore of the Arctic food web. They hunt generally for seals, but more recently they've been potentially, adapting to life on land because they've been seen fishing in freshwater and freshwater glacial ice instead of the open ocean sea ice, which is really interesting. They live quite a long time, anywhere from 15 to 20 years. Their mothers do keep their cubs for about 1.5 to 2 years before they're kind of go out on their own. And I think we talk a lot about polar bears and their homes disappearing because, again, they rely heavily on sea ice in order to rest between hunting. They're very, very efficient swimmers. Their paws are actually webbed so that they can swim really, really well. But just like anything, you need to rest, right? You can't just swim for hundreds of miles without resting, right? So that's another way that climate change is impacting animals in the wild. Next up, we have our seals. So really fascinating here, differences between seals, which is the image here on the left, versus sea lions. These lovely creatures spend most of their time in the water, but they do come to land to rest and breed. And they actually have both hair and blubber in order to stay warm. Kind of wild, like whenever I look at pictures of seals and sea lions, they look like really slimy, right? It looks like they would be smooth, when in fact this is actually their fur. It's really thick fur as well. So when they dry out, you can kind of see it a little bit better, but kind of wild. So the main difference, by the way, between seals and sea lions is the orientation of their hips. So if you look at a skeleton of a seal, a typical seal here on the left-hand side, and a sea lion on the right, notice that with the seals, their hips are pointed backwards, so they actually can't walk on their back haunches, much like sea lions can. So if you've ever wondered, like why seals kind of do like when they're on land, they kind of like, I don't know, hobble along or kind of like bloop along, whereas sea lions can actually sort of walk. What's kind of wild too, when you look at the skeletons here in the schematic, how human-like they look, right? They have a very, very, very similar skeletal structure to humans. I mean, even look at their hands, right? They have 3 finger bones, just like humans do. That very, very similar bone structure in the arms and the legs. I don't want to name the wrong bone, but even ribs and shoulder blades, spine, things like that. I very much encourage you, if you have not before, or to go again to the Cal Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. They have several displays of sea lion bones, and they actually have a really cool interactive thing where you can push a button and it will light up the bone that we see in a seal and then or a sea lion, excuse me, and then the very similar bone in the human skeletal structure. So really quite fascinating. Also differences, seals have claws, like their fingernails, if you will, actually protrude through their flipper, whereas sea lions actually don't. It's just a straight flipper. So kind of cool, kind of interesting, I think. Last animal that I want to talk about in this video, of course we're going to talk about whales, but that'll be in the next video. They deserve their own. But these little buddies are manatees and dugongs. These are sea cows, basically. So these are herbivorous. They descended from an elephant-like animal. They are actually the only herbivorous marine mammal, meaning they only eat plants, which is one reason why they're so big, right? If you remember back to why like baleen whales are larger than toothed whales, because they are eating at a much more efficient level. They can weigh upwards of 3,000 pounds. They tend to live in shallow coastal waters and fresh waters. In the United States, we observe them heavily down in Florida, in the like in the Everglades and kind of in the mangrove tree regions down there. Unfortunately, there's only about 10,000 individuals worldwide at the time of the recording of this video. So that being said, they are an endangered species, and they are protected in Florida. I do believe that because of the protections in Florida, their numbers are rebounding, which is fantastic. And then dugongs are what we call them, but they're basically like the cousins, and they are the ones that habitate in like the Western Pacific, kind of over in like Indonesia and Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Eastern Africa. So kind of cool, kind of neat, I think, these various creatures. So that wraps up most of the marine mammals. And in our next video, we will cover whales and all the fascinating, or many fascinating things about whales. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.